Welcome, everybody. My name's Kim Hosen. I'm the Executive Director of the Prince William Conservation Alliance, who is sponsoring this program tonight. And we are able to do that thanks to the support of our members, who we appreciate very much. And I'm going to just share my screen for a minute and show you our webpage, where you can see right now we have a rain barrel raffle going on, so you can support our programs and have a chance to win this fabulous hand-painted rain barrel, hand-painted by a local artist at 60 gallons and a one-of-a-kind. And also just to put a plug in for our photo contest, and hope you check into that and contribute your photos. So Prince William Conservation Alliance, we do programs like these, and we do a wide variety of things. We're working to establish equitable, sustainable communities, promote environmental stewardship, and create opportunities for residents to engage in the decisions that affect the quality of their lives. And we really appreciate your interest and your support for programs like this. To get started, I'm just going to introduce a couple people. I see that Supervisor Janine Lawson has joined us. You want to say hi, Janine? I don't even know where you are.
Hi, everybody. I'm looking forward to the presentation. And Frank, I know you've talked to my aide, Mary Beth, several times, possibly even Michelle. And I'm sorry I haven't met you personally yet, but I'm really interested to do what we can. And I know that you and Joyce have connected as well. So look forward to hearing more about the cemetery and what we can do to preserve Thoroughfare.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thanks, Janine. And Justin Patton is here. And Justin, can you just say hi? And because you're part of the program?
Sure. Hi, my name is Justin Patton. I'm the county archaeologist based out of the planning office.
And he's joining us tonight to answer questions. And we have Frank Dulany and Frank Washington and Dulany Washington, Frank and Dulany here, who are going to be the program presenters. We're going to start off. We have Supervisor Pete Candland, who is here, and he is going to make a few welcoming remarks. Pete?
Yeah, thank you very much, Kim. And it's great seeing everyone. Hello, Supervisor Lawson. I see you there. Thank you for joining us. And I want to thank the Prince William Conservation Alliance for hosting this event, for having me share a few comments before we get started. And I want to thank everyone for joining the call. As was talked about, and as what we'll hear later, we have so much history here in Prince William County that folks just don't know about. And the first step in preserving that history, protecting that history, is learning about that history. And that's why it's so important for folks to get on the call tonight. I grew up in a large family. My mom is very big into genealogy, and she's also very big into cemetery preservation. And so I spent many a Saturday morning going around on the hunt for family cemeteries. She'd get a tip that there was one in some wooded area down in Charles County or down mainly in Charles County and Prince George's County. And so we'd get the van together and we'd go down and we'd search for these family cemeteries. Sometimes they were larger than just family cemeteries. They were community cemeteries. And we'd find these areas and we'd work to restore them. And I remember she would always tell me about these grave sites and these cemeteries, that these graves were the story of our community. And it really told about who came before us and how it was important to preserve those areas, to honor those folks who came before in our community. In Prince William County, we are very fortunate that our local history is national history. Our local history tells the story of this country, how we got to where we are today. And it's extremely important to preserve that historic nature of our country. And Thoroughfare is no exception. I mean, Thoroughfare tells the story of Native Americans who lived here for hundreds, thousands of years in the eastern part of the United States. And it also tells a very important story of freed slaves who built a community and their ancestors who are still in this community. And that's something that we have to fight for. That's something that we have to protect. There's too much in our community right now that is getting destroyed for the sake of progress, for the sake of economic development, for the sake of so many things that are destroying these treasures that we have that really should be protected for future generations. So as a member of the Board of County Supervisors, and I know I speak for Supervisor Lawson too, we are proud to stand with the families of the folks of the Thoroughfare community. We're going to do whatever we can to fight for them, to protect them, to make sure that their voice is heard, make sure the voices of their ancestors are heard. And that all starts with Mr. Washington has just done a fantastic job, and the folks out there in bringing awareness. The Conservation Alliance has done a fantastic job of bringing awareness, and this is an important step getting on this call tonight. So I just want to thank everyone again for their interest, for their willingness to be here tonight, and I'm proud to stand with all of you in protecting this very important community. So thank you very much, Kim. I appreciate the opportunity to say a few words.
Thank you, Pete. We sure were delighted to have you here tonight. We have actually a whole lot of illustrious people here from the Historic Commission. And I know Bill is here, who is Mr. Cemetery. We have Pete Landeros, the DC representative of the American Indian Movement. And I hope as we go through the program that you all speak up and join in and share your views and experiences. What we're going to do is let Dulany and Frank give a presentation. If you can hold your questions till the end, that's terrific. If you have something you have to ask right away, please raise your hand, which is an icon down under participants at the bottom of your screen. Or you can use the chat feature to make a comment or to ask a question. After the presentation is done, we're going to open it up to a community conversation, and we hope that you will share your thoughts and views, comments, and ideas. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Frank and Dulany, and we'll get started.
All right, thank you, Kim. I appreciate that. And thank you, Supervisor Candland, for your words of encouragement as well. We'd just like to take some time this afternoon just to give you an overview of what our challenges have been, where it started, a view of what Thoroughfare is like, its community, its people now, connecting to our history and to our ancestors. So here you will see a gate with a boulder. This is where it all started. I was having some work done on our Peyton Community Cemetery at the end of this lane here, having it cleaned and having the fence put around it, just to get it kind of just cleaned up and get it ready for the season with flowers and things. My mom wanted to put things like that on it. We're also looking at possibly having a funeral. My aunt had passed away recently, and her husband is buried in that cemetery, and she had wanted to be laid to rest beside him. However, because of COVID, that didn't take place. But we still went on with the cleaning and getting it prepared. One day when we came in, the lane was blocked off just as you see it, with a boulder and a gate. No warning, no anything, just completely blocked off. This was done by the Broad Run Brewery. I spoke to one of the employees that day and asked him about the gate, why it was there. He said that he would have the owners get in touch with me. I left my name, my number. No one ever returned my call. I called several times after that, left messages for the owners. No one returned my call. This went on for a couple of weeks. Eventually, I received a call from a gentleman by the name of Kemper Acquaintance, and he said he was a representative of the WM Tender Company. And he stated that he owned the cemetery and that we were not allowed to have burials in the cemetery, and that there was a possibility that they could also have the graves removed from our cemetery. I told him that it was a community cemetery that had been in the family since before the 1800s, and that outside of the family, there were no owners. We were the owners of the cemetery. We had taken care of it, we had maintained it, and it was an active cemetery. The headstone you see to the left actually is by Susan Payton, and it's one of the oldest headstones in that cemetery, dating back to 1855. Following that, we started sending out emails, reaching out to people to try to get some answers, some help. The boulder remained, the gate remained. The company from the brewery never answered our messages whatsoever. The gate remains as it is, and we still do not have access to a road that has been the only road to that cemetery since before the 1800s. Ashley?
Right there,
If you can back up to the previous slide, right there.
so one of the things is where it's thoroughfare, we're actually a couple of miles outside of Haymarket. We're in between Haymarket and Plains. The sign you see there says a free people of color at Thoroughfare. The sign is a historical marker, which we have across from the what we used to have as the general store. It is still a store there right now, it's active. And so that sign talks about the history of Thoroughfare, it talks about the families that have been here, that were brought up here, Paytons, Primuses, Allens, Fletchers. You know, we've been here since before the 1800s in reality. But those, you know, there were people here mixed in with Native Americans. There were former enslaved people. There was a mixture of people that are here that brought up Thoroughfare. And you know, one of the things I love about this sign, it shows how everybody came together and worked together in Thoroughfare, which is, as far as back as my memory takes me, it's always been like that. The people here have always worked together. You may not have had a lot, but what they did have, they worked together. And so with that, they built up a community, even to the point where, you know, they didn't have a church, they didn't have schools, and, you know, they couldn't get anybody to take care of it, so they took care of it themselves, which goes to show how industrious, how determined they were to not only provide an education for their children, but also even a spiritual education for them as well. And so we carry on that legacy today. That same thing that was done then, it's the same thing that was passed on to us, which is the same thing that we're passing on to our children as well. So the sign sits right there, right on Route 55. You can't miss it as you come down. Right before you come out of Haymarket, a couple of miles out, before you cross over the railroad tracks, there is a store on the right-hand side, and the sign is right across from the store.
It's also important to really stress the fact that this town was established by slaves, free slaves, and Native Americans. And another point is that this is one of the first towns that actually were the Native Americans and the freed slaves or slaves actually intermarried at the same. So that was another very historical, pivotal point for this town as well. They lived together, they worked together, they strived together to build a community, and they coexisted in a way that built a town that was sustained all that time, self-sustained town. Ashley? So here you see, this is just an overview of Thoroughfare, the little quaint town. So Route 55. A lot of it is as it has been all these years. But very little has changed. It's a very quiet, family-oriented town.
One of those you see is a road that was leading into where the church is, actually, right off of Thoroughfare Road.
And I don't want to interrupt you. Sharon, do you have a question that needs to be answered right now?
Sharon Richardson?
No, Sharon Harvey, who
Oh,
has
okay,
her
thank
hand
you.
up. I guess not. We'll continue on.
All right, Ashley. Okay. So this is the Norfolk School. It was the first African-American school here in Thoroughfare. It was actually, the land was donated by the Primus family. And the Primus family actually were born into slavery here at the Carter Plantation. The school was a part of their property. The county actually gave money for the school to be built initially. However, students, there was it's one of the only schools in the area. So we have children coming from outside areas, from the Plains, from the Gainesville areas, from outside the Haymarket area, from all over to this one particular school. Actually, our grandparents actually attended the school, and they're in this photo here somewhere, but they're in that photo. But the school grew so large that they had to actually build another floor to the school, but the county would not allow money for that. So they saved their own money, their cents bit by bit, and they ended up building the second level themselves, money that was funded by the actual community itself. These are some faces of Thoroughfare. This is the Johnson family, the Nickens family, Fields family. You have the Tibbs and the Gaskin families, Washington, Allen, the Barber family. More of the Barber and Tibbs and Gaskin families. Barber. Tibbs and Gaskins. Okay. This is the Webster family and our Aunt Betty. She lived to be 101 there, and this is Frank Fletcher, and he's also the Peyton family as well. My Aunt Betty, back, even though she lived to be 101, she lived about, what, 3 more years after that?
Yeah, she lived actually 103.
Yeah. So, and she's really kind of an example of what Thoroughfare is about, her strength. She was 103, but she moved around like she was still, you know, a 67-year-old lady. She was just strong. She had a strong will. She was strong body. She worked hard all of her life. That was the key for Thoroughfare. There was a lot of people just like her who put their heart and soul into this land and really worked. It wasn't something that was given to them. They worked and strived every bit of what they had, and she was a strong example of that. Allen and the Fletcher family, as well as the other families of Thoroughfare. This home here was the Johnson home, but it actually was part of the Clover Plantation. This home was actually was sold to the Primuses in 1873, I believe the deed says. It was from that point on, it was always lived in or owned by slaves, free slaves or Native American ancestors. My aunt lived there up until she passed away. Another aunt, my mom's sister actually, until she passed away 2 years ago, I believe. The house is one of the last of its kind. It had no running water. It has a well. It's just one of the last of its kind. And we really want to have this home preserved. This is her son, Charles, and her daughter-in-law, Alma. This is the old well that they drew water from. The stones you see here was part of what was an ice house, actually. The stones are the only thing that's left from that ice house. In the far corner to the right, you see an outhouse that they had for the home as well. But the history of this home dates well back before 1873. But the importance of this home is that you have probably maybe over 6 different families at different times that actually lived in this home and provided for their families and built their families through this one particular home here at Thoroughfare. Ashley. This is the sign that sits outside of Oakland Baptist Church. And this is Oakland Baptist Church. It was originally known as the Little Zion Church. This wasn't a building that was actually original building. Actually, the building was called an arbor brush, and it was established by a freed slave by the name of Alexander Johnson. And what a brush arbor is, it's like a little hut, and it has 3 sides to it, and it's made of poles, and the roof has a row of poles and hay placed on top of it. And the thing that binds the poles and the hay together is called okram, and it's like a cord or a piece of fiber that's tied around the poles and tied around the roof to hold it together. Little Zion was later changed to the name Oakland Baptist Church. The name Oakland was derived from that cord that binded that little shack together. Oakland meaning binding together, the community bound together by faith, by family, by love, by struggle. So that word Oakland, the binding cord of that little shack that was the initial Oakland Baptist Church grew into this, and it became the center of our community. And that same analogy of that cord binding us together, Oakland binding us all together, is a part of what we're doing now in this community. We have communities all coming together that are bound by one common thing, and that's our history, preserving our history, preserving the legacy of our ancestors, our home, our land, our cemeteries. I think there's no more fitting word than Oakland right now, because it signifies a bond that's going to tie us all together as we move forward and solidifying our place in history.
I would also say about the church also, you see some of the members of the church present day, where, you know, one thing about the church for us has been central. And like, we actually grew up just a little ways down the road, even when there were Sundays when we didn't particularly have church, a couple of Sundays a month, but my brothers and I would still come down to the church ourselves. We never heard too many people breaking into a church, but we kind of worked our way into the church. We would sit here and we'd have our own service, and then we would leave our money here and then we would go back home. But that's how important this whole place has been to us. But that was something that was passed down to us too. We have a love for the church, but it's about the people that bound it up together, that worked it all together, that gave us that particular love, the heritage that they passed down to us, the work ethics that they passed down to us. And so as you see our young people there, you know, you see them all gathering together as we went out front. I'm actually been blessed to become the pastor at the church that I actually grew up in. So for me, that's this, I mean, for all of us, it means quite a bit for us. Our heart, our soul, our blood is invested in this, not just this Oakland, but in all around the thoroughfare.
And the history that was passed down to us, we want to pass on to the youth. My brother, so he's pastor, and I'm youth director. So it's very important to both of us that these kids have the same kind of support that we had growing up. We were taught at an early age, you know, that we had self-worth, you know, that we could achieve anything in life we wanted to achieve, you know, that these things that are placed around us didn't have to hold us back. You know, there was always faith and hope that would always bring us through. And these kids are our hope for the future, you know, passing it on to them so they can continue to pass on what was passed on to us. One of the voices of these kids right now is Jacob Jenkins, and he's a 16-year-old young man. His voice already is so strong, and he's proud. You know, he's proud of where his community. He's proud of his family. He's proud of his church. You know, and he's an example of what we want for these kids. We want them to grow up with that sense of pride and community and connection. And that's what this community is. It's a connection to our history. It's a connection to our strength and our struggles, but it's also a connection to how we can overcome and rise above, you know, this world and the things that try to hold us back, especially as people of color. You know, it's not easy. You know, sometimes we are met with obstacles that, you know, a lot of people aren't met with, but that's our history, you know, but the history also is strong with overcoming and moving forward. And that's so much what our heart wants for these children here. And that's why what we're doing right now is so important. We want them to see us standing up, we want them to see us standing up for this home and for this church, so that they know that, you know, that it means something, that it has importance.
And my brother was talking about how we were taught that there was more to life than what we see to pursue. It actually, for me personally, it inspired me to take my ministry also to Joe Gibbs Youth for Tomorrow. I was actually there for about 14 years in ministry, actually passing on the same things that was given to me. I was also allowed to pass that on to at-risk youth also too. But that's all because of what was taught to me. So I was blessed in that opportunity as well. Some more of our youth.
And these smiling faces you see on these kids is the way they are all the time. They're just happy, loving kids because they're surrounded by so much love and support. Again, just like we had when we grew up, same exact thing. And these smiles are very, very true to who they are. Ashley. So this home here, this land right here, was handed down to my dad from our ancestors. I mean, it was part of the property that they owned. They gave it to him. He put this little house here. My mom and dad raised us all here at this particular house. This home, it was small by most people's standards, but it was full of love and it was strong and it stood all these, the test of time. And in this little house, it tells about faith and trust. I can remember as a child when the storm would come up, my mom would take us in the hall with a flashlight and we would sit in the hallway with the flashlight and she'd read little Bible stories to us. We learned from an early age, that we turn to God, that all things we work out, no matter what storm we were confronted with, we held on to that faith, we would always get through. And that's what we're holding on to right now for Thoroughfare. No weapon formed against us will prosper. And that's something that we grew up on. It's instilled in us, that we can overcome these challenges if we stand together. Ironically, it's the day my dad passed away a few years ago. And one of the last things I spoke with him about that day when he passed away was this property. And he was so adamant that he did not want to lose this land, his land that he was given right here. And one of the last promises I made to him was that as long as I had breath in my body, his land will never be sold or taken from him, or taken from this family. And it's true. I mean, there was a love for the land. The entire family is like it. They had a love for the land and a nurturing for the land. This land at one point we thought was being threatened as well. Someone coming across, putting flags on the land, deciding that they were going to take part of what they felt was theirs, and we stood up against it. And so far, it's so good. The battle has ended, we believe. But it's just it's hard to understand how people can think that they can just come in and take what people have struggled and worked so hard for all of their lives. To many people, it may not seem much, but to us, it's home, it's family. It's a sense of belonging, which is what Thoroughfare is for many people. It's a sense of belonging, a place you can come back to and know without a doubt that you have a place, that will never change. I was given the opportunity because of what I grew up to go out and travel and see the world and do many things that I never dreamed of doing. I'm living the dreams of my ancestors. They worked hard to give us the life that we have, which is why fighting for these cemeteries is so important, because their death is not in vain. Their struggles were not in vain, and so it's important to give back. And this home, this little place here, was always home. It was a place I always come back to, a place that always reminded me of who I am, at heart, and what I have to offer this world and what was given to me from an early age on until now.
I would say too about this little home is that we were able to, that's how we were connected so much to the churches, because we could almost see through the woods, almost see the church. But we were, it was in view from us. We walked to the church from our home. Every time when there was church on Sundays, we would walk down the road, and that's how connected we are. The whole area is just connected right to us. Even walking down the road, those whole areas, everything is connected up to us. The house, the church, land, there's one big connection. There is no separation of all that. It's all together.
And you may wonder why we're talking so much about family and the community and what we grew up with. It's because that sense is still here. That's what we're fighting for. That sense and that feeling we had of growing up here in Thoroughfare, that still exists here today. Not much has changed. The church is the same. The people within the church are the same. The community is the same. That sense of belonging is the same. The importance of the church and what it means to the families here is the same. Even though some of our answers, they're passed on, but the love and the lessons they taught, it's all still the same. So it's important for us to sit here and talk about these things about family and what we knew growing up, because it molded us into, the men that we are today. It molded us into the people that would stand up and fight the way we were fighting today. We saw our grandparents fight. I remember my Aunt Mary fighting for the same type of things that we're fighting for now. She was strong, a strong example of what it means to stand up and to stand your ground and to let people know, that you have a voice. And they gave us a voice, and that's what we're trying to do now. We're using that voice to talk about our history, but we're also using our voice to try to save and preserve our history as well, and preserve the future for our youth.
I was going to say too, one of the things that that I know I've always believed in is that we can't know where we're going unless we know where we've been. That's why the past is so important to us, because in order for us to proceed and to move toward the future, we also need to know about where it is we've come from, what it is we've gone through, what our ancestors went through, what they passed on down to us. That takes us into the future as well.
Ashley? So this is the Peyton Cemetery, community cemetery for Thoroughfare. The gate is actually blocking us to this cemetery. Those poles you see around it is the gate that we had recently put around it. And you can see these few graves here in the front. Originally we thought that cemetery held approximately maybe 18 to 20 or so graves. But as I started having it cleared out, I began finding more graves in this area. Comes to find out that this particular grave of slaves, free slaves, and Native Americans holds approximately 75 to 100 graves. I found an additional, what looks like to be 70 graves in this particular cemetery that were covered by brush and debris that we've cleared out. So the history is expanded, and they're all the old stone graves. You know, they don't have names on them, but they're definitely graves. And we had Mr. Justin Patton come out with me one day and to look over what I had found, and he agreed that that's exactly what they were. We found rows of 10, according to him, of graves in this cemetery. So it became even more important to preserve. And even though these graves don't have a name, it's not important. What's important is that they were lives that were part of Thoroughfare. They're part of a family and a community that survived and that worked this land and are now resting in peace here. And the idea that someone think they have the opportunity, they can take the opportunity, I guess, in their minds to come in and to remove those graves, you know, our family, our loved ones, you know, is beyond what I can comprehend. This is our family. This is our home. This is our grave site. And we will continue to treat it as such because that's exactly what it is. Let's see, Peyton. Ashley. Moses Johnson, actually he and his wife were buried on the Potter's Field as well, the Peyton Cemetery. He was actually in World War I.
World War I, he was a private in World War I. Yeah, it was, I think he was in transport, I believe it was. But we're still trying to get more history on him also as well. You know, again, it goes to serve the what I would call, you know, showing how we're all Americans. You know, this is somebody who fought for his country, came back home to live. You know, some of the things that inspired us. You know, my father was in the military. I was in the military. My brother was in the military. We have another brother who's also in the military. So, you know, those are things that were passed down to us. You know, service to our country. You know, things that we would pass down again from one generation to the next. You know, so it's important that we remember this person who served his country valiantly.
Moses Johnson is also a descendant of Alexander Johnson, who actually was the founder of the Little Zion Church, now Oakland Baptist Church as well. This is the Fletcher Allen Cemetery, and that house you see in the back as well, our Aunt Betty, who lived to be 103, that was the house she lived in. This cemetery is a concern for us because right behind the cemetery, between the cemetery and the house, we found out that they're planning on putting housing. My brother and I actually walked up on a guy doing a survey, and they're surveying putting 5 septic systems in that area right there between the graveyard and the house there, which is going to change everything regarding the cemetery. It's going to block it off to us. We will no longer be able to inter family members in this grave site if that happens. Most of us grew up being told that we would always have a place beside our ancestors. We chose to do so. With this encroachment that's happening now and this land grabbing that's happening now, that may not be the case. This property is in question because we can't really figure out even how they acquired some of the land they've acquired. This was part of a land that was owned by many brothers and sisters, and they took different parcels of land here and they built their homes on it. Suddenly, somehow, without, again, we hadn't pieced it all together yet, but they're taking pieces of parcels, putting them all together and creating one sale. And it's beyond us as to how this is happening and who's allowing it to happen as well.
Wait, before you move on, I think Sunny has a question for this particular point. Oh, you still,
Yeah, I'm here. Thank you. It's great to be on another super producer event here from French Whim Conservation Alliance. But I guess my question is, you know, having gone out in the last few months or so, is there a history connection between those that are in the cemetery are they descendants from any of those that were up on, that may have been up on the conservatory land, up on, up the road there at where the mill is?
There is a
And,
connection. I'm sorry, go ahead.
and another question, and how does all of this, and I know some of them, and I spoke to one, actually went to school on Leopold, where Leopold Preserve is. So how are all of these gems coming together in terms of the message?
They're all coming together because they're all family. They're all related. We're all
Right.
connected by family and by blood. And also there's connection to the Civil War as well,
Right.
which brings us to the mill as well. It's actually the land that you're looking at on the other side of this grave site between here and my aunt's home. We've actually found artifacts from the Civil War, Confederate buttons and
Mhm.
buckles and things of that nature. So there is also that connection with the Civil War as well. But these communities were all linked. Like, for example, this Fletcher Allen Cemetery, there are also other family members in the Peyton Cemetery as well. You have the Primus Cemetery, which is down the road from this particular cemetery. Again, all part of the Cloverland Plantation. These are all, some were slaves, some were freed slaves, some were Native Americans as well, but they're all part of that same central family unit that built Thoroughfare as well.
Okay, because there are enslaved, markers up there by the mill and on the state owns the land on that part of the preserve. There's a family cemetery that's has a wall around it, and then there are two clearly defined, when I've had verified enslaved markers up there.
Are you speaking near the mill itself or over on a different area of Leopold?
Up on the mill. They're on, this is the state-owned land, not the conservatory, but the
Exactly.
preserve.
Right.
Right. So there you can actually, well, I was there yesterday, but I've done it before. I mean, when you go up across railroad tracks, you make a right and kind of keep up I guess the red trail, probably less than a quarter of a mile or so.
Exactly.
Right.
We know exactly what that is.
Okay.
So
And,
maybe we can cover this more completely.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So this is a great start of bringing all of the jewels together, and I really appreciate it. And keep up the good work, guys.
Thank you. And I want to point out too, just to add on to what he just said, just because it's important. The Battlefield Trust is also now with they're offering some words of advice and guidance as well. So they see an interest in Thoroughfare because they definitely see the connection between Civil War and the Gap and these cemeteries. So it's all beginning to connect now, and that's going to be another big part of this equation.
Yeah, I mean, Custer got run out of town probably over there by the Family Dollar. That's the truth.
Okay, well, let's carry on and we can pick this up at the end. And we do have somebody from the American Battlefield Trust with us tonight.
So these are just some of our ancestors that are in the Fletcher Allen Cemetery, Mary Susan Allen. Actually, the land that I was speaking of that was given to my dad was handed down from her to her kids and then to my dad. So that's where that land originated, was from Mary Susan Allen and Cornelius Allen. Ashley. So this is the brewery. This is the gate in the boulder was placed there by this particular company. And something that caught me about this particular picture is that you can't really tell the sign, but the sign over in the lower right-hand corner says, "Life is beautiful." And I just thought for us, it was kind of ironic because for us at the moment when we saw that boulder and that gate, for us, it wasn't beautiful. It was hurtful. It was painful to know that we have relatives and ancestors that we were blocked off from without warning, without cause. So life is not beautiful right now. I mean, life is, I shouldn't put it that way, because of our belief and our trust, life does have beauty, but life is challenging right now for us. I'll put it that way. So what they see is beautiful right now for us is a challenge that we're gonna continue to face head on. It's hard sometimes to drive by a place and see a cemetery right across the field and know that people are laughing and partying and having a great time and just enjoying their lives. And right across the field, you have a cemetery, people are laid to rest, where they're not really resting in peace because they've been blocked off, because they no longer have their descendants coming to be able to pay their respects or to visit or to maintain, the cemeteries that needs to be maintained. It's a hurtful thing.
I was going to say it's hurtful. It's hard sometimes to convey to people the pain that you may feel when you see something like that going on. When you especially because history is extremely important to us, and when you have the pain of seeing basically a desecration of something that's so important, and it's almost like those people didn't matter, and that hurts to have somebody almost, at least from my opinion, from my viewpoint, that it didn't make a difference if they lived or if they died. It doesn't make a difference at all. They were here and they were gone, and so we're just going to just plow right over top of them and just move them right out the way. And to see that sort of thing it's a hurtful thing, but it creates anger also too. It hurts, but it makes me personally angry to see something like that because of the fact that you are desecrating, these grave sites, these cemeteries. I'd ask anybody who has family and they have their own family cemeteries, how would you feel if somebody came in and did the same thing to your ancestors? They just plowed completely over top of them, threw away their gravestones or whatever it was, like they never even existed. That's a very hurtful thing.
Ashley? Okay. So this is Mr. James Scott. What my brother was just referring to, the cemetery that was recently bulldozed, what we call desecrated, held approximately 75 to 100 graves. His home sat on that property for many years. He was 100 years old when this picture was taken. He died. This was in 73. He died a short time later. Ashley? This here is a cemetery register form, and this is important because Mr. Ron Turner, who actually in 96 and 2001, should I get it right, the Prince William County Historical Commission funded an effort to document all the cemeteries in the area. Mr. Turner did some great work, and he documented, from my understanding, over 400 cemeteries. So the information for the Scott Cemetery, according to what we found out, was actually submitted to the county once he finished his findings. This page here is also another documentation of what he found. Scott Cemetery is also listed on his list of cemeteries as well. That's important because the Scott Cemetery has been completely bulldozed over. Those stones, as my brother said, no longer exist. This is the area in here where the graves once existed. The problem that we're having now is that they're saying that no one had any knowledge of a cemetery being on this property, which is infuriating for us, because if they're saying now, which they are saying, there was no ill intent by the people who bulldozed this land, somebody's responsible for what happened. The fact that the county is saying now that nowhere in their records that they could they see anywhere that there were graves on the cemetery, it shows that somewhere somebody dropped the ball, because the paperwork did exist. It was done by Mr. Ron Turner. It wasn't put properly, I guess, on some map, from my understanding, that where it needs to be. But that's neither our problem, our fault. It's neither the people resting in this grave. It's not their fault. Somewhere in the county, and there needs to be accountability for what has happened. The excuse right now is saying that no one knew, and that excuses the action, is not acceptable. We have 75 or 100 people lying here right now under this ground that has been completely leveled over. And to just simply say that, oh, well, we didn't know they were there, it's not good enough. It's not good enough at all. Again, it comes back to that same feeling of hurt, and dismay, driving by. I drive by this place every single day on my way home, and I get to the point where I can't even look over, because even sitting in that, it like brings tears to your eyes to think that in that land somewhere, you have people who struggled all of their lives, who worked. Some of them, possibly died never seeing freedom. Some of them died after achieving freedom and working so hard for the land that, that they're now buried under. And I'm always taken back to something I found during some of my research, and it's a will that was from an owner of the Carter plantation. And in this will, it named his assets. And the assets were include a list of his slaves. And some were listed as $50, as $25, as maybe $300. But what got me the most were the ones that were listed as idiots, worth nothing, of no use. It hit home because it really shows the lack of value that was put on those lives when they were here. And so for me now, I see what has happened to the Scott Cemetery is the county and people saying to us again that these lives still have no value. Even in death, they have no value. They had no voice, when they were here because they were treated as if they meant so little. And it's the same thing I feel for the community. The way it's being handled up to this point, it's like saying to the community that you all have no value. This is not that important. This legacy is not that important. These lives are not that important. Well, that's not true. These voices below this ground are still crying out. They're still crying out for recognition. They're still crying out, right now, to me, in a sense, even for freedom, because even in death, it's being taken away from them, and people saying that it's okay. It's okay to treat them that way. It's okay, to bulldoze over your lives as if you have no meaning, as if you have no place here. And again, it's not acceptable. And it does, like my brother said, it makes you angry. But for me personally, it's more of a hurt. I hurt for those lives because I heard the stories growing up from my great aunts and uncles, of the struggle of their grandparents and of their ancestors and what they went through to have what they have. Again, it wasn't easy, but the one thing that they held on to was the hope that one day, whether they saw that there would be freedom for their ancestors, there would be freedom of schools and freedom to travel and freedom to live your lives and to have dreams and to move forward. And that's what they gave us. That's what they gave me. So to look at this ground now and see it all cleared over the way it has, to me, it's like a slap in the face. It's like a slap as if those lives still to this day have no meaning. And I appreciate so much what Supervisor Lawson and Supervisor Candland have done. They have been supportive. There's much more that needs to be done, but it takes more than just the two. It takes people working together. And right now, for me, what I see, I don't see a group of people working together to save and preserve this legacy. What I see mostly are a group of people who are more worried about media centers and more worried about development and more worried about taking the land to put, for money or for greed or for, to fill their own pockets. It's not about the community. It's not about preserving what we have. It's not about preserving a legacy or a history that is our collective history, not just our history, but it's a collective history of all of us, of Native Americans, of free slaves, of white, of all of us together. We did a media conference last Sunday, and you had Muslims, you had whites, you had blacks, you had Native Americans, you had every nationality which you can imagine, and we all came together for one cause: to stand up for these graves, to stand up for these lives, to stand up for our right to have our place in history. This graveyard here, just like the Peyton Cemetery and the Fletcher Allen Cemetery, they all have a place in history, and they deserve to have that place recognized and honored, because it is hallowed ground. We have several other cemeteries in the area: the Primus Cemetery, the Webster Cemetery, a cemetery called the Sanctified Church over on Thoroughfare Road. There are many cemeteries in this community that are made up of a group of people who laid there in their lives and worked all their lives to have something that was passed on to us. And no one, in my opinion, has the right to come in and bulldoze it over and not be held accountable for those actions. Ashley, this is more of the same property. As you can see, you can't even tell where a headstone or where a grave ever even existed there. And ironically, it's right next to the same gate that blocked us to the other cemetery,
Right.
to the Putin Cemetery.
Mr. Washington, this, just as an onlooker here, this is breaking my heart. I don't know how you're putting up with this. And I don't know how the county is putting up with this. This is a terrible, terrible desecration of our history.
Sharon, thanks for sharing. We're going to try to wait until the end of the presentation, which I think
Okay.
is coming up. Do you have something for now, John? Or can it wait till the end?
No, I think I need to ask this question now of Frank.
Okay.
So I was going by the other day, the Scott Cemetery, and it appeared that work was continually ongoing even after they know what they've done to the Scott Cemetery. Have you noticed that?
I've been keeping an eye out. I mean, to be honest, I haven't seen trucks moving along the ground like I did initially. I do know that it's been gated off. So on the weekends when they have people there, I have to admit, I've seen no one walking on it. I've seen no one moving around on it. So I would have to say that the brewery has kept people off of it to this point as far as movement that I've seen personally.
All right, thank you.
Justin, do you have any comments you want to fill in there?
Sure, yeah. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So we have been, there's been a number of different departments working on particularly the Scott Cemetery issue. As you may or may not know, there's an open zoning violation case. That was the first thing that brought it into the county system. And that is still an open case. And that was for ground disturbance without a permit. If he had applied for a permit, I would have been able to advise him that there's a cemetery on the property, but the owner didn't do that. We are working with the owner to come up with a scope of work to conduct archaeology, to identify the limits of the burials, identify the edges of the cemetery, and also identify the burials within the cemetery itself. And that is still preliminary. I'm waiting for a written scope of work from their archaeological consultant. But I've given them guidance on what my expectations would be for the types of archaeological methods should be employed. And I expect that within the next couple of days or the next week, however long it takes them to turn that around. I'll need to take a look at that and approve it, excuse me, and move forward. Sorry, I'm looking at, see if anybody asked a question in chat. So we are moving forward on that. We're moving forward as aggressively as we can. And it does take time to work through issues. It's not something we can just launch an archaeological project right away. We're going to have to do some assessments, figure out the existing conditions that are now, and then figure out a plan to bring them back, to re-identify where those burials are, work with the owner to get them fenced, get the cemetery fenced and protected, and establish an access easement to that Scott Cemetery.
Hey, Justin,
Yeah, who's
it's Janine. Elena asked a question related to the Scott Cemetery. Can you look in the chat room and answer that?
I think, Elena, the question is, I would like to know how the first inspectors missed the grading of the Scott Cemetery. Is that?
Yeah, that is correct. So violation.
Sure, yeah, they didn't know that a cemetery was there. The inspectors didn't know a cemetery was there. They didn't have the to the data that I do.
Which begs the question, why don't they have the data? If they're going for an inspection, yeah.
We're gonna work to correct that, Elena.
And I'm sorry, I'm going to cut you off.
That was short. Come on, Justin.
Well, hold on, Tammy.
I'm serious. I mean, we made a mistake. We're working to correct it.
I'm sorry, 1 second, I'm sorry. I have to say this. I understand about there being a mistake, but the point is that I know you had the information, but that information was there. The only reason that whomever are claiming that they didn't have knowledge of it, to me, that's not a good enough excuse, because someone did not put the information where it needed to be so that it would be there to protect this cemetery, and that cannot be overlooked. That the information was there, the information was available, but somewhere along the way, someone did not place that information where it needed to be. And I think that's important because so many times of graveyards, especially with people of color and ancestral grave sites, the same type of thing happens so many times over and over and over again. And the documentation that's usually done for cemeteries like this are not the same as sometimes as people that are not of color. And so my problem with that saying that they were not aware, that just doesn't hold water with me, because even if they were not aware, somebody needs to be held accountable for the fact that they should have been aware. The information should have been available for anyone to look at and see that there's a graveyard holding 75 to 100 people, in this ground. And you're going to tell me that someone didn't realize that had to be, when they had the paperwork right in front of you, Ron Turner provided the information right there. Why wasn't it placed where it needed to be placed for these people to see? That question has to be answered, because that is an important question, because that leads back to accountability as to why these graves are now desecrated. We cannot leave out that question. Why wasn't it not put where it needed to be put so people would be aware that these graves existed on that land?
Well,
Frank, I don't want to weigh in, especially if Supervisor Candland's on the call, but I guarantee you, if I know Supervisor Candland, he will rattle some cages and get to the bottom of it down at county staff. Because I agree with you. Clearly there was a big mistake, and everybody's human, but so many efforts sound like they were put into place, and I'm not even sure where the inspector was from, but it sounds like this was a pretty egregious mistake.
it was indeed. And
The
Justin,
the inspector wouldn't have prevented, the clearing had already occurred when the inspector came on site.
so am I correct in assuming or in thinking that the original problem came with the landowner did not get a permit?
Correct.
And we go from there. So,
Everyone hear me?
yes,
This is Harvey Jones speaking. Hi, Justin, how are you? I have a question. Now that the brewery people have desecrated the cemetery, should not they be the ones paying for all of this study, archaeological studies, and should not the work cease until all this has been done? Because as John said earlier, it appears that they're continuing to work.
You're right. They are paying for the archaeological studies, and they shouldn't be doing any work in that area. They've been told not to do that. And if anybody observes any work, please contact me and I'll contact the inspector.
And I guess the second part to my question is that isn't there some fines that should be levied immediately because of this?
It's my understanding the Commonwealth Attorney is not bringing any litigation forward. So that moves any litigation into civil court, and I'm not familiar with those options.
So it appears that at this point, our families need to have our attorneys file something in court, because this appears to be more of a court issue than anything else.
Right.
I don't see, in other words, I don't see the county commissioners doing anything.
Well,
That's
let me
really
jump
the
in
bottom
here.
line.
Yeah,
I don't see them taking any action or being proactive where this is concerned, because this is not the only cemetery that our families are dealing with. We're dealing with the Fletcher Allen Cemetery, where they're trying to put in 5 septic tanks, and all of a sudden they're saying that some of the grave sites that you and I walked are beyond the boundaries. So they need to come forward with whose boundaries lines are they using and how did they come up with the boundaries. So it's a snowballing problem, because next we'll see the Primus Cemetery down the road under the same kind of attack. And it's criminality in terms of I'm concerned, because how do you desecrate one cemetery and then you have on the other side of the road people drawing architectural lines to say they're going to put in 5 septic tanks? And I think when you and I talked a few months ago, they have to apply for permits for that to occur. So I guess, where are the easements that should be applied to stop all the work? I don't understand. Maybe I don't understand the process, and maybe it works differently in Prince William County. But I see a laissez-faire attitude about this. I really do. The brewery is sitting there. They're clearing the land. They're continuing to cut trees. You have another developer out of Virginia, I have their name, that is now drawing lines and trying to claim that the Fletcher Allen Cemetery is out of bounds, when it's been there for what, 200 years. So and I want everyone to understand on this call, it's not just the Scott Cemetery. Mr. Scott was a Black Indian. And as far as the Fletcher Allen Cemetery is concerned, Frank and I had a conference call with one of the primary heirs, his John Kenneth Washington, whose father built this house that abuts the Fletcher Allen Cemetery. He didn't even know the house had been sold. So that's a violation right there, to sell it properly and not notify all the heirs. And he's not been apprised of any development that's taking place. And he may be on this call. He's on the West Coast. So we have a multitude of problems, and I'm certainly not attacking you or holding you responsible in any way, because you've been so supportive and helpful to all of us. But
So I would just like
concern.
I would just like to ask Justin, which I kind of lost you here. Is
okay.
Is this a complaint that you can carry forward tomorrow and turn in concerns about violations of the stop work order?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a violation of this, let's talk about the Scott Cemetery first. If there's a violation, I don't, if people are seeing activity on the Scott property, then please call me or email me or call Kim and she'll get in contact with me and we'll send an inspector out there.
And I can
Pete,
tell
do you
point
have any
blank, I drive by that property every day, and like I said, to be honest, I've never seen, I have not seen anyone else on that property. So and I drive it every single day by there. And if I had seen someone, I would say so, but I have not seen anyone. So in my opinion, as far as that part of it is, they've complied with keeping people off of that property. Because like I said, even on weekends when it's full of people, no one that I seen is ever on that particular piece of land at this point. And I also want to clear up another thing too. I don't know, there are commissioners, I mean, there are people on the board that could do more, but I still want to specify that to this point, Supervisor Lawson and Supervisor Candland have been supportive. You know, they have opened doors and gotten things going for us. So I don't want that to be brushed aside. There's more that needs to be done, but I'm adamant and want to be clear that they have been supportive and they have helped open doors in this and to get some answers for what's happening here. So I want everyone to understand.
Thank you. Pete, do you have any comments?
Yeah, and I appreciate that those comments there. And we are here try to help. I will tell you that this is one of the frustrating parts of county government, I guess any government body. You've got a situation where one arm of the government, Justin, the Historic Commission, knows of these locations, have worked very hard to document those locations. Then you've got other parts of the county government that don't have that information. And that's completely unacceptable. The amount of money that this government spends every single year, one hand should know what the other one is doing. Land sale documents, any time that any person purchases a land, they should be able to have the information to know that if there's some sort of grave site or cemetery on it, so then they couldn't claim ignorance when either they were genuinely ignorant of it, or whether they were just trying to get away with something. When I got that original call from my appointee on the Historic Commission, he had been out there with Justin, he had been out there with Frank, and they had seen the Scott Cemetery. He was outraged. I was outraged. I immediately called the county attorney, talked to the county executive, the whole team, talking about how in the world could something like this have happened. That turned into how in the world can we make sure that this doesn't happen again. Now, as far as what's happening as far as holding these individuals accountable, it sounds like I don't have the information that that Justin has, which also gets me very worked up here, that it seems that the county supervisor is one of the last people to know. But I will tell you, tomorrow I will absolutely be talking to the county attorney's office, absolutely be talking to the county executive's office. It was my understanding that this information was going to be turned over to the county, the Commonwealth's attorney's office, and then ultimately the county Commonwealth's attorney's office would make a decision. It sounds like Mr. Patton has heard that decision before I have, which definitely is a breakdown on communications on the county side. Again, another example of where the county has fallen short. I will make sure that I will do everything I can to make sure that this doesn't happen again, that the Historic Commission has to be talking to the planning office, that when somebody purchases land, this kind of information is addressed and taken care of. In the end, we can't undo this, but I absolutely agree. People need to be held accountable for the full force of the law. And you've got my word that that's what we're going to be doing.
Thank you so much for that, Mr. Candland and Justin. I appreciate that. And both of you have been very supportive. I'd like to say one more thing, which I'm just kind of curious about, and that is that the Chapman Beverly Mill, which was constructed in 1742, I believe, is on the historic register, and it was in Thoroughfare Gap. And later on, after the Civil War, Thoroughfare was settled by our ancestors, but our ancestors also worked in that mill for 200 years. And it was providing goods and services, and it has quite a history that I won't go into. And the mill and Thoroughfare are connected. They're one and the same. So it kind of escapes me from just an historical point of view that the state of Virginia could make the mill an historic site and say that it's one of the most important historical sites in the state, and not Thoroughfare, because Thoroughfare grew out of that mill after the Civil War, and before the Civil War, it played an important role, and our ancestors played a role there. So I want to give you that historical perspective when you're talking about Thoroughfare. Is connected to the mill. It's all connected, the entire community. So that's why our families have said it's not just the cemeteries that need to be preserved. Thoroughfare needs to be preserved. The entire community. In every plot of land where there was a home, where one of our cousins or aunts or uncle lived, they buried their family members in the backyard. They used a Bible to coordinate the headstones with the names of those that are buried. And unfortunately, when property was deeded, free slave and Native American burial sites were not recorded. And I think what I hear you saying now, and what I think is maybe happened, and I'm not saying this is an excuse or acceptable, is that the people who owned the brewery used some computerized map which showed that there wasn't any cemetery there, which is, as Frank said, impossible. But that's been the case for many free slave and Native American burial grounds throughout the South, throughout the state, in Florida. I thank you again for wanting to take some proactive action to correct this, because Thoroughfare has a very, very important history prior to the Civil War, going back to the early 1700s, that our ancestors played a role in. So I thank you.
Thank you for your comments. And I see a couple hands up. John, if you could wait a minute. Let's get through the remaining couple slides and then get back to our conversation. So Ashley which is just exactly the topic. Okay,
Who is
Ashley.
responsible to mitigate the damage? How is the access to the cemeteries going to happen? Going back to one thing about the cemeteries, I need to have cleared up as well. On the Peyton Community Cemetery, I found, as I said earlier, almost looks like 70 additional graves in that cemetery. Justin met with me, go over that cemetery, and I wanted to make sure that those graves do not get lost. So at the current time, I've stopped all cleaning of the cemetery of that area because of the vegetation and different things Justin said needs to be in place for him to do his work. However, with everything going on with the Scott Cemetery, which it needs to be, I also don't want to lose sight of the fact there are 70 additional graves now in that Peyton Cemetery that need to be accounted for, need to be documented so that the same issue does not happen again. Again, total between all three cemeteries, the Scott Cemetery, the Peyton Thoroughfare Community Cemetery, and the Fletcher Allen Cemetery, we're talking over 250 graves, approximately. So there are a lot of graves that need to have the attention and have the protection that needs to be there. And like I said, we haven't even gotten to the Webster Cemetery or to the Sanctified Church Cemetery or even to the Primus Cemetery as well as of yet. And the only reason I haven't really pushed those because they're not really under immediate threat at the moment. My fear is that what happened to the Scott Cemetery can happen again. And that's why it's adamant that even though I know things take time, some things have to be sped up a little. As far as the Peyton Cemetery, those graves need to be looked at now and recorded so they have their place in history so that going forward, we won't find ourselves back in the same place again when somebody comes in and takes something or doesn't acknowledge the fact that you have, again, almost 75 to 100 graves and a grave site that people aren't being accounted for. And these are our requests. Restoration of the Scott Cemetery, of course, first and foremost. We do want clear access back to our Peyton Thoroughfare Community Cemetery. How someone can block off a road that has been in use, from my knowledge, from our oral history, since the 1800s, how someone can block off that road saying we no longer have access to our cemetery through that particular road, again, is beyond me. And even if everything has happened, that gate still remains, which to me says very clearly that they still don't have any respect for our family, for our cemetery, for our ancestors that are lying in those graves. Because if that were the case, that fence would no longer be there. That gate would have been open long ago. But in my opinion, the brewery still doesn't see the harmful actions that they are incurring upon this family and this community by that gate remaining there at that opening. That road has been open, like I said, since the 1800s. And even when the brewery was there before all this happened, they had no issue with the road. We used that road long after the brewery bought the property that was adjacent to the cemetery. It was only when they bought the Scott property, for some reason, that's when they decided to block our access to the Peyton Cemetery, why at that time they chose to do that, I have no idea. But that's when that started to happen. So the two are related. How it's related, I have no idea, but the gate remains where it is.
Okay, and John, you had a comment?
No, Kim, my only comment would be to ask people to go to the chat. I've listed the GoFundMe fundraiser. We're still $1,000 short of the goal. And it's good to say the developer should pay for it, the county should pay for it, but in the end, it's going to be the families in the community, and there's going to be a lot of legal expenses. So everybody, please go to the GoFundMe page.
Well, there's some interesting information in the chat. We'll have a follow-up email and send the whole transcript from the chat out.
Thank you.
Does anybody who hasn't already spoken, somebody new and have a comment? We have lots of knowledgeable people. Bill, you're on mute. Hold your space bar down. Hey, Bill.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now.
Okay, very good. Well, I'm outraged with the whole situation, and I hope that everything has been stopped in place. No further soil disturbance anywhere until this is resolved. It's pretty much an abominable situation, and I think the plans forward look adequate, but what had gone on before this was certainly quite inadequate.
And not the first time this has happened.
No, this is I've seen almost as bad as this.
Yes.
And that's a key point, that it is a pattern. There's a pattern to this. If you look throughout history and even some other things that are going on in surrounding areas, you see almost, maybe not the complete desecration as you see with Scott, but you see the same type of grabbing and trying to remove or to try to destroy that part of our history. And there is a pattern. And I've tried my best, as I've said several times, not to make this a race issue. But you cannot leave out the fact that there is a race element to everything that's going on. Yes, it's our collective history we're fighting for. But there is an element of race to this, because this happens primarily to people of color with these type of things, with their land, because it wasn't documented the same. We weren't afforded the same documentation for our land and for our sacred places as it was, people following the Civil War. Following the Civil War, you had all these laws that were enacted to save things like the battlefield and these monuments that were erected toward all those people associated with the Civil War. But for towns like Thoroughfare, they were pretty much brushed aside and forgotten about, because we weren't afforded those opportunities to preserve, which is why we have to fight to preserve what is left now. And hopefully those opportunities will be afforded to us to stop this pattern of abuse of our cemeteries and of our history. And that's what it is, it's abuse.
Pete, you need to unmute.
Yes. Yeah, were you talking to me? Oh, different Pete.
Sorry. Oh, there's a different Pete, but you can be after him.
Yeah. Well, my name's Pete Guadalupe Landeros. I'm a Pasquayaki Indian from Southern Arizona, and I'm the director of the American Indian Movement in Washington, D.C., Pennsylvania, and Maryland. I'm sorry to say that this isn't a new issue, especially when it comes to us as Indigenous people. They've been running roughshod over our burial sites since the beginning of this country. And exactly what you are frustrated about the lack of detail when it comes into them doing their correct research and what's supposed to be sacred land, money talks. To give you a good, for instance, all these pipelines that we're fighting against right now, a lot of them have gone across sacred land, burial sites, especially the biggest documented one has got to be up in South Dakota with the Dakota Access Pipeline. They plowed over 1,000 graves and just flattened them all out so they can put a pipeline in. No, they didn't even consult the reservation, which land that it was on. So I'm not surprised by any of this in any way, shape, or form. It just affirms my frustration when it comes to the way this government works against us as people of color. And as much as we don't want to make this into a race issue, It is. Because if I went down to Arlington National Cemetery and plowed over the oldest part and knocked every single gravestone down, they'd be shooting at me and I'd be in handcuffs.
Amen.
Why isn't the same thing going on when it comes to ours? Why isn't the same respect given? Why isn't the same respect given? Why isn't the same respect given? And as far as I'm concerned, gentlemen, you have the full support of the American Indian movement in the Mid-Atlantic area. I'm sorry I haven't been able to be out there personally, but there has been John Steinbach, who also represents AIM for a long time. But any other functions that you may have out in that area, please contact me personally and let me know what's going on so I can try to make it out there. I was in North Carolina 2 weekends ago for almost the same issue that's going on with the pipeline being installed down there. So I understand your frustration, and as much support as we can give, we will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So Pete Candland, do you have something to say right now?
No, nothing to add right now.
Okay. Sharon, you have a comment? Sharon Harvey?
I just want to say that I am not a person of color, but I adore history, and I adore the fact that there are people fighting for their history, and I will support you all, Washingtons, as much as you need.
Well, Pete, I think that, would you like to, maybe if people send their emails showing their support to Supervisor Candland, would that be helpful?
That would definitely be helpful. There are things that need to happen moving forward. I mentioned accountability to the individuals. If there was something that was done that was illegal, that definitely needs to be addressed, but there needs to be accountability to the county. And part of that accountability comes into how are we going to change the processes moving forward to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Now, I'm not one for advocate too many additional spending. I don't like additional spending, but this would definitely be a situation where I think we need to bring in additional resources to to make sure something like this doesn't happen again, that information translates from one side of a county government to another. So there are things that we're going to have to do moving forward. And I think any emails that can be sent to me, to the Board of County Supervisors, folks asking them to put those additional resources in place, I think would be very helpful.
Can I say something short?
Oh, totally.
Thanks. I just want to, I guess, just share a little bit as far as the pattern that I have seen in Prince William County in the last 10 plus years. Actually, it's been probably a little more than 10 years. And Frank, as I was listening to you, I was also thinking of some other, debacles that the school division and county government have just totally mishandled family graves. The recent one from the school division was the building of the Colgan High School. And I think it made regional, if not statewide news, because it was so poorly handled.
Right.
And then we, the Board of County Supervisors, were also put in a really difficult position a couple years later related to a fire station. And as I'm listening to you, and I believe you, and I believe the gentleman from Arizona, that the cemeteries of minorities have been dismissed historically. I wouldn't deny that at all. Unfortunately, Prince William County has messed it up, regardless of the color of people that are in the graves. And all the more reason that we have a history of getting it wrong, and we have to make sure that these processes are perfected before we continue down this road of reckless development. And right now I'm also thinking of the rural area and how many other family cemeteries are out there in the rural area that we don't know about. So I just want you to know that I'm committed to leaning in on you know, county staff. I'm very bothered that, as Pete was saying earlier, the right hand's not talking to the left hand. Don't know why that is, but I'm very troubled by everything that I'm hearing tonight, and I'm committed to making sure that we improve our process down at the government building so that, God forbid, we never run across this again, because this is egregious and it makes me, I'm very bothered by it.
Me too.
So
Thank
anyway,
you, Janine.
I'll quit rambling, but I'm just really struggling to make sense of this, and I can't.
No, I'm really glad you brought up the school and the firehouse, which I was intimately involved with. And Bill Olson is here, who was also very intimately involved with it. And it was a rampage. And it's really difficult for those of us who are here for those two issues, not to mention Saratoga Hunt. It's like deja vu all over again. And how could this still be happening after 10, 15 years? So it's a question. Right. And I will say that builders or landowners not getting the appropriate permits is a huge problem, not only for protecting our historic resources, but also for protecting our environmental resources. And perhaps we need to up our inspectors to make sure that that is addressed, because that has been going on for years. And the penalties are really minimal, so that I think a lot of people, when they own property and they start to clear it, they just say, well, you know, the penalty is going to be $150. If I get caught, I'll just pay it. So maybe that needs a look-see right from the beginning.
Kim, may I weigh in on that as well, please?
Sure.
As far as the penalties, that's a very valid point, because you'll see with the big contractors, especially the road contractors, they'll take those penalties. They'll take them every day of the week, because the penalties are worth the time that, and I say that with quotes, that it's worth the time they're saving. It's criminal. It's criminal activity, and it should not be allowed. We need to increase those fines. But what I really wanted to weigh in, I will say the same thing that I said at the press conference several weeks ago. While I love to email Supervisor Candland, and I will, I encourage everyone to email the entire board. Yes. That email address is bocs@pwcgov.org. The entire board will get your email. That they need to know this. And I will also say, I want to be on the record, as much as I admire Supervisor Candland and Supervisor Lawson, I do trust with all of my heart that they will follow up and we will get some results. I'm going to hold you accountable for your words tonight. I'm not going to forget it. I'll be asking you in a couple weeks, what's the status? What's the status? And I'm quite confident you'll have some answers for me. Thank you.
And if I may say something, I'm sorry, right? What you just said is very important as well. Someone earlier said something about, I'm not sure if it was just or not, but that this is a private matter. So some of the decisions that are being made and some of the things that are happening right now with the brewery, for example, are private things that are going on that we don't know about. For me personally, and for the coalition, for us, it should not be a private matter. Whatever's happening, we should know what's happening because it affects our lives. So this should not be a private matter when it comes to this, as far as us knowing what's taking place, what steps are happening moving forward. Because otherwise we're sitting back, not knowing what's happening, living a life where there's some nights, and honestly, where I do lie awake at night, wondering and thinking about all of this, how it's going to work out, what's happening. Are they standing by their word? Are they fighting for us the way they say they are? If you're not letting us know what happens, and you're in the wrong again, because we need to know step by step how this is moving forward. And if there's progress, we need to see that. Even if there's not progress, I need to know that. We need to know that so that we can continue to build our foundation of standing together to fight against this situation. There should not be a privacy issue when it comes to people within the Coalition for Thoroughfare trying to achieve protection for these grave sites and for the cemetery for Thoroughfare. There should not be a privacy issue. We need to know step by step everything that's happening.
The county owes you a better answer than oops.
It's true, Sharon. And actually, I think tomorrow is a really great day to flood supervisors' email boxes with support for this, for historical resources in the rural Crescent.
Kim? I have a question I'd like to
Elena has
ask.
been waiting, and then Mary Beth.
First of all, I just want to say that every time I hear Frank and Dulany speak, I'm always so moved. You all bring something real to what we are talking about here. And I want to make sure that what doesn't get lost is that this isn't just about cemeteries. Your community is still thriving.
Exactly.
You guys are still here. This is not just saving the past and not just preserving the present, but we're talking about the future. And nothing tells a journey better of, I think, African Americans than talking about where you've come from and where you're going. And I think in the context of where we are today in this country, your fight here is representative of something much bigger. The county is absolutely culpable. They didn't have the cemetery marked on the map. In fact, they're so culpable that they actually owe money of overcharged taxes to the descendants. So there's a whole lot of issues at play here. The county, I believe, not only, first of all, the brewery owes a debt for what they have done to your ancestors, whether they knew it or not, they know now. The county owes a debt, not just of back taxes. The county now owes a debt of how they aren't only responsible for mitigating what has occurred, but protecting the entire area. Now they don't just need to make up for the cemetery. Now this is something much bigger, because what you see is a threat to your entire community by development. I think they need to buy those parcels back. They need to preserve the entire area. They need to put you into a historic district. They need to figure out how to connect Thoroughfare, not only to Carter's Mill, but to everything else in this area. There's to Carver Road. This isn't just some small separated community. There's a whole narrative to be told here. And when the county talks about rebranding, they always talk about live, work, play. It makes me want to throw up. What we're really talking about in the context of live, work, play is a community. And that's what we feel here. We feel, and I hope you feel it from us, that we are all in this together. It doesn't matter that I'm not a part of the history on Thoroughfare. I'm a part of the future now. And so I think the county is has a responsibility here, and they need to connect to the Battlefield Trust. They need to figure out how not just to protect the cemeteries. This is much bigger than the cemeteries now, and no one shares it better than your advocacy. And I know that from everybody on this call, whatever we can do as a community to grow this message, not just for Prince William County, not just for the state, but I think for the entire country. There's something that, there's a, like I said, it's a debt that needs to be repaid, and there's a way to do it, and there's a way to preserve it and keep intact, not just your history, but your future, past, present, future. And that's what you all represent. And any way that we can help, we're going to keep helping.
Thank you very much, Elena.
Yeah, excellent. I think that this county is
Sharon.
I think yes.
Sharon, we're going to go to Mary Beth next. Okay.
Oh, okay. Then I just was going to build on something that Elena said, but I won't forget.
Oh, good. Okay.
Yes, I wanted to make the point that this is something that I think could be carried forward, is the fact that a lot of what is kept history-wise has been passed down through these families in these communities through oral history. Mm-hmm. I think maybe if we make it a point to look at some of the other communities that are placed throughout our county in particular right now, if we start oral history searches, we may be able to come up with a lot more information on a much more timely fashion. I've said this before, that I knew of these stories back when I taught at Stonewall Middle School, because my students were the kids who lived and grew up in these communities, and they used to tell me these stories that had been passed down to them from their grandparents, their parents, and aunts and uncles. And I think there's no more valuable place to start than with the actual people who lived the history.
That's really a good point. Thank you. Okay, Sharon, you got 2 cents to add?
Okay, my only 2 cents are that with branding, I think it's easier for me to grasp live, work, honor. We have to honor our history. We have to honor the people that are going into the future, our kids. And we need to honor the people of the past who are sitting in our cemeteries. And that's all I want to say.
Thank you very much.
Ashley,
do you have
something I'd like to say real quick? This is
Sure.
Harvey Jones speaking again. It won't take 60 seconds. My experience, and I have intimate experience with developers. I used to manage all the property in the district for the school system for 4 years. I know how developers work. I understand the politics of developers and of a city council and of a Congress that I had to interact with. I'm wondering if, I'm going to ask Justin and Patton and Pete Candland this, shouldn't members of the coalition be meeting with the executive committee of the Prince William County Commissioners on this? Because we can send all the emails we want to, but emails are emails. I think at this point, the urgency of the matter demands that we have a face-to-face meeting with members of the commission.
with members of the supervisors, you mean?
Yes, the supervisors, I mean. I don't understand how the supervisors can work with a Walmart and make it go so smoothly with all the inspection and the grading and the permits and everything else, and find difficulty protecting a few cemeteries. That tells me.
I do think the emails are important.
Oh, I didn't say they weren't important. What I'm saying is that I think we need to go a step further. What I'm suggesting is
I'm
that
agreeing with you.
Yeah, we have a meeting with the supervisors on this.
I am agreeing with you.
Okay.
And Pete, do you have any suggestions on how this could come about?
I wholeheartedly, yeah, I completely agree. If there are folks, you know, I get maybe a couple folks together who are willing to go and visit with the individual supervisors. I think that would be extremely helpful to put a personal testimony and be able to answer any questions that the supervisor might have. One of the challenges that you have going to the board meetings and speaking, and I do advocate folks going to the board meetings to speak, but it doesn't really start any sort of dialogue, any sort of conversation. You're not there, you can't answer any questions that the supervisor might have. So if there's a group of folks, small group of folks, obviously, the more refined group, the smaller group, then the more you can get into the issues. I think it would be very productive to go and schedule a meeting with each one of the supervisors and visit with them, share the information that we've shared tonight, and answer any questions that they have, and get them on our side.
I agree.
Okay, that's good.
And it's good to go make appointments with the supervisors and send at least 2 people. Supervisors can only meet with 2. There can only be 2 of them for a meeting.
So if you're meeting with more than one supervisor at a time, then we could take 5 or 6 members of our coalition that represent the Native American community, the African American community, and so on, to meet with them collectively. Because, you know, if you start meeting individually, you're still, you know, time is passing and no action is being taken. But I'm not sure the makeup of how the supervisor, the whole council is made up. But I think that the coalition as a representative group needs to meet with the supervisors in a special meeting about this.
I think
That's
we
what
all
I'm
agree.
proposing. And I don't know, Pete, maybe you could help facilitate that as a first step.
Sure.
Absolutely. And Harvey, to your point that you made earlier, you better believe the developers are meeting individually with supervisors. The developers are being heard by having these meetings, and so it's important that you all do the same. So they hear your voice just as much as they hear the voice of the developers. So I can help out in any way getting that.
I'll work with Frank and Dulany in making that happen.
Kim, I have a question.
Thanks, Karen. Go ahead.
So I want to bring this back to one area that I'm very concerned about, and that is that Frank and Dulany and the gentleman with the Native American group really stress the fact that there is a pattern here, and everybody's agreeing that there is a pattern and that there has been a tendency for land disturbances to proceed willy-nilly throughout this county. And given what we are seeing happening at the brewery and at the Scott Cemetery, I feel very strongly that what is needed is a stop put on any type of developer activity throughout Thoroughfare until the county gets control of what is going on around that community.
Exactly.
There are too many historic resources, too many family cemeteries, too much legacy at risk, and the county needs to take responsibility to make sure that a stop is put on everything until the county gets control of what is going on.
I agree, totally.
Pete, Janine, Justin, who needs to do something to make a complete stop happen?
Yes. I would like to just say that there's a lot of moving parts with a lot of different people, and somebody needs to kind of spearhead it so that you're getting all those same heads together so they're communicating and have an understanding of, they're all on the same sheet of music, basically. Because if you have too many moving parts that aren't connecting with each other, they're just going in their little narrow pathway, not thinking about what B and C are doing at the same time. So
well, that's my point.
Yeah.
All the moving parts that are desecrating and tearing down our history and affecting these families, it all needs to be stopped.
Can I ask you a question, since this isn't my district, I'm not as familiar. It was the land clearing to build on 10-acre lots, or what? Why were they clearing all that land?
There's two different issues going on. The Scott Cemetery, I'm not sure what their main, I've heard two different stories. Initially, I heard that the Scott Cemetery was desecrated because they wanted to put sunflowers and corn, plant corn on that field. Later, I heard that it was because they wanted to put a sound stage on that particular piece of property. I will note that as soon as everything was halted for the Scott property, a sound stage did go up on the property adjacent to what was cleared. So I'm not sure if that was the true purpose for it or not. I just know that those are the two excuses. No one really has been clear on that. The other place where the septic systems are an issue is the Fletcher Allen Cemetery. Nothing has been touched there as of yet, other than flags being placed around on the property. And we've had, to my knowledge, at least 4 different surveys within the last month or so of that particular area. The last one being the one where the guys, I think, well, my brother and I saw one, and then also our neighbor walked up on another, where they both were saying that they're looking at putting 5 septic systems in that small area there. Again, and we're trying to head that off and prevent that from even taking place, because once again, that's going to affect the Fletcher Allen Cemetery, you know, what's the graves that are currently there, and plus the fact that these are also active cemeteries. The Thoroughfare Community Cemetery, that's an active cemetery. The Scott Cemetery was not, but these other two are active cemeteries. And if these things continue, then, as I said earlier, those of us who grew up believing we'd have a resting place beside our ancestors, that would be taken away from us. So the issue with the septics, trying to find out exactly who's doing that, who approved that, because the guy that I spoke with, the surveyor, he was adamant that it was going to happen. And when I spoke to him about the fact that the boundaries he was placing for the Fletcher Allen Cemetery was wrong from our oral history of that, he stated, well, we will decide, well, the builder will decide where those boundaries exist. And he left the flags where they were, and he went on and continued to do what he was. So that's the mentality of the people that we're dealing with. Their word basically is law. And again, ours on this side really has very little meaning.
Frank, is that the cemetery that's next to your aunt's house?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right, thank you. That helps clear up some things for me.
That was a
Justin,
great presentation.
Can you answer my question?
Rhonda, do you have a question or a comment? You're on mute.
Can,
Oh,
or,
can you hear me now?
Yep.
My question.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because it's mute here. Okay. Yeah, I have a concern about timeline here. I'm hearing, oh, we're going to look into this, so we're going to do that, we're going to follow up, but I need a timeline. That sounds nebulous to me. And it seems to me somebody needs to be relieved of their position, fireable or something, to get the confidence back, that, not only tighten up whatever loopholes that allowed for this information, one, not to be placed somewhere else, but it seems to me it's not enough to say, oops, somebody's messed up. Somebody needs to lose their job or some kind of heavy consequence in this to get the confidence back. Because to me, it sounds casual to me. Oops, well, county messed up. There needs to be a hard consequence behind it, in addition to tightening it up so this doesn't happen again.
Well, the hard consequence, in my view, needs to be at the right place, which in this case, and I think others that are similar, is pretty high up, maybe higher up than would be in line to get fired.
No, but they're saying that, well, because they graded the land or whatever without a permit, that's part of it. But, and then the fact that it wasn't put on the certain map, I mean, one aspect of the county had access, knew about it, and the other did not.
Well, perhaps we need more inspectors that are going out.
Yeah, or something, because someone, it's like I don't know, has there been a fine? Has there been a penalty? Because that's the thing that kind of got this in motion. The fact that they did whatever they wanted without a permit, thinking that they're not going to get maybe a little tap on the wrist from the county. There's no fear that there's going to be a consequence. Now that there's a consequence, the sky should be falling on folks. And then,
Justin, do you have any comments on that?
I don't know how zoning violations are fined, or if there are fines associated with them. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Do the supervisors know? I mean, who would know that? So that, because it would do a lot to restore some confidence, that is getting taken care of.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and.
It would be neighborhood. Oh, sorry, Supervisor.
No, well, you just took it out of my mouth. So it would be neighborhood services that issues the zoning violations, and the county attorney's office works with them closely. And to answer Karen's question, Karen, I don't know legally if we have the authority granted to us by the state code to just halt all development in that corridor. I don't know, but I'm certainly confident that Supervisor Candland's going to have a long list of questions tomorrow for county staff. And out of deference to him, I'm just going to simply follow his lead. I'm confident that he can handle this, and I will certainly follow his lead and support him in doing so.
Is it not true that if an easement can be put in place for archaeological reasons, is that not a true statement? I've heard that several times from different sources that if they feel that there's archaeological value or sense to an area, that because of the archaeological aspect of it, that an easement can be put on the properties until they have a chance to really explore and research the entire area to find out exactly what that archaeological value is.
Yeah,
And that's a state thing.
Yeah, I don't know if easement's the right term, but
right.
There
An easement
likely is. Justin would know more than me about
An
that.
easement, yeah, an easement requires the landowner to actually be willing to grant that easement. It's not something that the county can impose. It would have to be the landowner willing to place an easement on their property.
But I thought that the state can put a stop on any building where there could be archaeological value.
Right.
Like down in Jamestown and Williamsburg, they do it all the time.
I'm not aware of a state law that allows them to do that anywhere in the state of Virginia. There may be specific areas like Jamestown where they have that opportunity, but I'm not aware of that.
So that's something that we can check into a little bit more.
I do have something to add a little on zoning, and it's slightly different because it's not history related, but we had a new neighbor move in and decide that he was going to bring his entire construction company and park it in his driveway and clear out the trees and put his dump trucks and do all these things. And so the neighbor called the county and they had to send an inspector out who spoke with them and gave them a warning. It probably took 6 weeks for that inspector to show up. Meanwhile, he had cleared all the trees and put gravel down into this area. And the inspector said, you can't have all these vehicles here, but you can hide them back there behind a fence if you put a fence. So now the guy's cleared more trees and put this big privacy fence in there. And he has the cars parked over his septic field, which I'm not even sure he's aware he has in a septic field. But the county has not really played the role that they should play. My neighbor calls all the time and says, he's doing this. And they're like, you're on the list. We'll try to get out there.
I think you can make a really good case. We need more inspectors.
Yeah. And
we need smarter inspectors.
I believe
we need smart ones.
I believe that last month that Yesley added
has been patiently waiting for quite a while with her hand up.
Anyway, that's
so it's getting late. Thank you for adding that. Sheila.
Hello, my relatives. My name is Sheila Hansen. I am Shawnee descent. I live in Delaplane, Virginia. I initially, when I heard about this from John, we went out for a media and it was heart-wrenching. After the media was over, we walked down that dirt path to go to the cemetery, and we were struck by, on the left-hand side, all the trees that had been bulldozed down. Little did we know that as we stood there, members of the Native American community, that we were looking at a grave site that had been bulldozed down. We said our prayers that we thought we were just staying for these trees, but actually we were staying for those ancestors that were now deep under the ground. We believe that when we put our ancestors into the ground and they go back to the earth, that they become a part of the trees and the grass and all that is living that is there. So in cutting down those trees, they have also cut down relatives. We walked down to the other cemetery and we observed some Native American burial mounds. Again, we laid our tobacco down. And because we have laid our prayers down and our tobacco down, we are committed to walk beside of the Washington brothers and all of those that want to see this desecration stopped. We live in a very affluent area in Northern Virginia. There are people that can afford to see that this, put the money up and see that this is stopped. I won't stop my support until that land, the Scott Cemetery, the road, the other cemeteries, is given back to the descendants that truly, truly deserve it and own it, and should own it. There is too much disrespect. I don't know what has happened to this country. I think it goes back hundreds and hundreds of years. As Indian people, we have known about the Native American presence in Thoroughfare for a long, long time. We give them our full support. And I want to just say, this is not just about graves and bones to dust. This is spiritual for all of us. This is a spiritual fight for respect and for acknowledgement for people that deserve it.
Amen.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
And thank you for your comment, Sheila. Very heartfelt and appreciate it. It's getting late. Frank and Dulany, do you have any closing comments?
One thing I wanted to say too is, and I was listening to Sheila, thank you too again for everybody's support. You know, here in the church, we have a wall that we have placed in the back, and on that wall, we have pictures. And those pictures of people who have been in this community, people who have dedicated their lives to this community, people who had an impact on our lives, and some people who are obviously before we were even here. But we call that, you know, the Bible has something in the, if you know about the Bible in chapter 11 of Hebrews, they call it the Hall of Faith. And they list all the people in there about what they all went through and how their faith took them through from one thing to another, starting from Adam all the way through. And you know, I think about the same thing for us, that what we have our own Hall of Faith here also too. And those people, the Bible talks about how those people pursued, even though they didn't see the promised land, you know, some of them didn't see it, but yet they still persevered anyway, because what they saw was something for their children. There were those who were flogged, those who were beaten, but they still pursued on because what they saw was something greater, and they wanted to have that thing for their children to pass down. And I really believe that why the Bible has all those things in there is for us to remember those people who have gone on, but also for us to remember them, but also for us to pursue and to continue to pursue and to go on. Not just about the past, but about the present and about the future. You know, that wall that we have in the back is also a reminder of that also too, remembering about our past, but also about the future. Those people didn't necessarily see all the freedoms, you know, that we're able to see now. However, they saw something still ahead. It was, as Sheila was talking about, it's a spiritual thing. And it was a spiritual thing, and it is a spiritual thing to continue to go on. So with that, you know, that's our Hall of Faith right there. Our legacy and our responsibility is to carry on with that. You know, the thing about the accountability with the county, you know, we were taught to be responsible for the things we do. We were taught to be accountable for the things we do. You know, and so that same accountability, you know, whether intention or not, that's one thing. But one thing about it is that when things happen, that you are accountable, that you are responsible for the things that you do. And so somebody needs to bear that responsibility, that accountability. It's up to us to make sure that we continue to pursue after that, to make sure that those that are responsible are held accountable to their actions also too. And so, you know, my point for us, I know for my part, and I know for my brother and my families, our families, is that we're going to continue to keep pursuing. We're not stopping with this. this is not just a one-day fight or a one-week fight. This will be an ongoing thing too. That was passed down to us, and that's something we're going to continue with that legacy.
And for me, I like to say
Very
first of all,
much.
thank you for everyone that joined us this evening. And I guess I like to end with the whole thing about value. You know, I don't want to see these people who claim to be in power, so to speak, live their lives in a way where they put upon us the same lack of value that has been put upon us throughout history. And that's exactly what it is. If they allow the Scott Cemetery to go without accountability, if they allow the Peyton Cemetery to remain blocked off and that cemetery threatened, if they allow the Fletcher Allen Cemetery to also be encroached upon with development, you're saying the exact same thing that the plantation owners said to Americans and said to the slaves at that time, which is you have no value and you have no voice. And that's exactly what they're doing. You're in the same category of saying that you have no value and you have no voice. We know that not to be true. And because of that, we're going to stand together and fight. And this isn't just a people of color fight. We have people of all races supporting of us, of all religions. So this is definitely a collective history, a collective fight, and we see that clearly. But the end result is the decision the board or the county makes is one or the other. It's either they value us as Americans, they value our history, they value our legacy, or they don't. And if they don't value it, they will continue to let this destruction continue in Thoroughfare. And if they do value it, they would take the steps to stop it now, not later.
Thank you very much, Frank and Dulany. This was a terrific program. I think we all learned a lot. And again, I think tomorrow is a perfect day to email your supervisors. We will put the program up on our YouTube page, the recording of it, and we will email everyone that link and a copy of all the information in the chat, which is, there's a lot of very interesting information here. And Ashley, is there anything else we need to consider from the chat?
Kim, may I say one more? I'm sorry, may I say one more thing, Kim?
Sure.
I'd like to also take time, I want to really thank the Coalition to Save Carver Road. I want to thank the Alliance. I want to thank our Native American brothers and sisters. I want to thank, you, Kim, Elena, Rhonda, so many people who have been so supportive of this effort. It's, again, we were raised to give thanks and to be thankful, and to see God's blessings in everything. And this has truly been a blessing to see so many people come together, to stand together, to support each other, regardless of religion or color of skin, that, they stand together. And as I think Elena said earlier, you have become part of our extended family. You have become part of this community as well. And you've made yourself known. We felt the love, we feel the support, and it does not go unnoticed. And we, as a community, as a church, and as believers in Jesus Christ, we appreciate that. And we look at this as a blessing, and we will carry it in our heart as a blessing.